Winshear Metals has got an interesting looking nickel, copper, cobalt project in Scotland. It's also got assets in North America. We're here to have a bit of an overview and a catch up on what's been going on over the last few months and where the company's going. And we're joined by Richard Williams to talk us through all that. Richard, very good to see you.
Alastair, good morning. Good to be here. Thank you.
So Winshear, let's start at the top then. For anybody who hasn't heard of Winshear, what's its main aim?
Well, the company itself has been around for a number of years. Myself and an old friend, Chris Mackenzie, formed Helio Resource Corp and took it public in 2004. Back then, our focus was copper gold in Namibia and then Tanzania. Some of your viewers who might have followed Helio will remember that we ran into issues with the government in Tanzania. We ended up taking Tanzania to arbitration court in Washington at the World Bank Arbitration Center, where we ultimately recovered $30 million from Tanzania after the expropriation of a SMP gold project. And we did take a look at some gold projects in Peru in the intervening period, but ultimately we returned all of the capital, or the bulk of the capital we had back from Tanzania, to our shareholders, restructured the company, renamed it Winshear Metals earlier this year to reflect the focus on not only gold but also nickel and copper and cobalt in Scotland. And over the last year, we've picked up, as you mentioned, two very interesting projects. One in Scotland, which is the nickel, copper, cobalt asset, and an earlier stage regional gold project just outside Thunder Bay in northwestern Ontario.
So very interesting suite of assets there. I think perhaps we could concentrate on Scotland for the moment, Richard. That's probably the more advanced of the two assets in the sense that there's been historic work done on them, and you've done quite a bit of work already on them yourselves. So tell us where we stand with the Scottish assets.
Yeah, I'll go right back to the late 1960s, where the British government brought in some incentives to encourage mineral exploration at the time. And again, some of your viewers might recall that I worked with Cornish Metals, and a lot of the work back in the 60s was focused in Cornwall, and a number of new mines were put into production on the back of these incentives, including Wheel Jane, Mount Wellington, Wheel Concord, Wheel Pendarvis. And the companies that had the most success were Rio Tinto and Goldfields of South Africa. Both of those companies then turned their eye to Scotland and recognized that in Aberdeenshire there was potential for nickel copper mineralization. And rather than compete over the same land, they formed a joint venture company called EVL, Exploration Ventures Limited, whereby they divided the area into east and west, with Rio Tinto exploring in the east closer to Aberdeen and Goldfields exploring further west, about an hour's drive to the west, northwest of Aberdeen, in the area around Huntly. Goldfields were successful then in discovering near surface massive sulfides plus semi-massive sulfides with nickel copper mineralization. They drilled about 19 holes, 3,500 meters on this target that they called Little Mill. And then they ran into issues with the farmer and couldn't get back onto the land to continue the work, even though they liked the project a lot. And I guess over time it just got forgotten about until about 5-6 years ago, where my former colleague at Helio, Chris Mackenzie, was going through some old reports of the British Geological Survey. He came across the reports relating to Little Mill drilling and jumped in his car, drove up to Scotland, spoke to the farmers and reached an agreement to do exploration and, if successful, follow on mining for nickel copper on these areas. In the intervening period from 2020 until last year, Chris's company, Peak Nickel, went back. They drilled about 3,500 meters of drilling, 24 drill holes to confirm the work that Goldfields had outlined. And they did that successfully, but they also demonstrated that there is cobalt with the system as well. And we're looking at two mineralized zones that's been tested so far, the north and the south zones. The south zone is anywhere from a couple of meters to 10, 15 meters wide. The north zone looks thicker but lower grade, up to 50, 60 meters wide. Last year, Peak ran into an issue where it was struggling to raise capital, and Winshear came along and proposed an option agreement, which we concluded just before Christmas last year. And so we now have the option to earn a 100% interest in the project. We call it the Portsoy project. It covers about 250 square kilometers, within which we have the old Little Mill target, which we now call Rodburn. And part of the agreement was that we would have to drill at least 1,000 meters in the first 6 months of this year, conduct some first phase metallurgical test work, and also do some downhole EM geophysical surveys to see if that works to guide future exploration. We had exchange approval for that just for Christmas. We raised $2.5 million in February this year and started drilling fairly shortly thereafter. And we're in the midst of that program right now.
So does that mean we're going to get news flow about drill results, in the weeks and months ahead from you guys?
Yeah, that's right. So we approached the project. We drilled the North Zone first, and just in a broad view, what we have in the area geologically is this mafic, ultramafic intrusive complex that is covered by 5 to 15, 20 meters of glacial till, which masks any outcrop, but the mineralization occurs immediately beneath that till. And so we've taken that area. We drilled the North Zone. We only had 2 holes previously, and we needed to figure out which way the zone was going. So we drilled 3 holes there, and visually it looks like we've figured out which way it's going. Now we're just waiting for the assays for that. The South Zone, which is about 600 meters away, is steeper dipping. It's where most of the drilling was conducted historically by both Goldfields and more recently by Peak. And we were testing a down dip extension of the high grade zones there. And we'll also have news for that once the assays are out following the North Zone. And then we'll also have some news, obviously, on the outcome of the EM geophysics. That's been used to great effect in similar deposits around the world to guide future exploration, because very often this style of mineralization almost occurs as kind of irregular, almost like rivers of now solid massive sulfides, and they have kind of an irregular shape to them. So you could be drilling within a couple of meters of some high grade mineralization, and EM, the downhole electromagnetics, often tells you where that is and what direction it's traveling in. So we'll be using that to guide future exploration.
So what in the current era would constitute good grades from a nickel, copper, cobalt project?
Well, what we've I'm going to lump Peak in with this. What's been drilled over the last couple of years, we are looking at zones up to 6 meters wide in the massive sulfides with 2% nickel, up to 1% copper, over 0.1% cobalt, and these are probably the best nickel, copper, cobalt grades in this kind of mineralization found in Europe recently. There is a big deposit in Finland called Sakatti, which Anglo American has, which is higher grade, but really outside of that, not very much. And I think when you look at today's political climate and the desire for domestic supplies of critical minerals, I read the other day that Europe only produces 5% of its nickel needs. So obviously there's a shortfall in supply domestically, and I think this project has the opportunity to fill some of that gap.
So you're going to carry on with work then. As I understand it, in the transaction that you did with Peak, there was a sort of spending commitment that Winshear made, and I believe that means that you're going to be doing some more work after this drilling. What kind of what will that look like?
Well, there's a number of things that we're considering. The way the deal is structured is that the market has changed quite a bit over the last year. When we started talking last year, it was very difficult to raise money for nickel sulfide projects. We need to spend £3 million over the next 5 years with a minimum of £600,000 per year. And we need to issue peak 6.5 million shares over that time period. And if we accomplish that, then we will have earned our 100% interest in the project, and Peak would retain a 1% royalty. So, with successful drilling, that always brings the need to do more drilling to really understand how big the system is. And right now, we're only looking at a very small area within the 250 square kilometre Portsoy project area. So there are other targets in the belt that we think are highly prospective. The best way we think currently to explore for them, we do have some historical data, but we would like to fly the whole belt with airborne gravity system because massive sulfides have quite a strong density contrast with the surrounding rock. If we have a large enough massive sulfide body, we should be able to pick that up with an airborne gravity survey. And we'd also couple that with an airborne magnetic survey, which will help map the underlying geology. Then we would look obviously for targets where we've got coincident magnetic anomalies, gravity anomalies, plus soil anomalies, and then we can prioritize a pipeline of targets to drill going forward. So I think it's not just one small project area which we are currently drilling, but I think there's more of a regional district scale opportunity here.
Yeah, it's very exciting indeed. And of course, if that's the case, that'll be sort of transformative for the UK critical minerals self-sufficiency drive, which you referenced a minute ago.
Correct. I think there's very much a focus today on the southwest of England, and we'd like to change that. I think there's the potential in Scotland is tremendous. It's very much overlooked, and clearly what Peak has achieved in the last couple of years, and hopefully what we're about to demonstrate will reinforce that. You've got a lot going on in Cornwall with South Crofty Tin being moved forward, hopefully to production. Obviously, the rise in the tungsten price, a dramatic rise in the last couple of months, has really pushed Tungsten West and helped Strategic Minerals Limited in their efforts down in Devon. And with ourselves, and there's also Aberdeen Minerals up in Aberdeen exploring for nickel copper mineralization. Any success that we have will obviously bring the spotlight onto the area and hopefully encourage the UK government to get behind the initiatives and recognise the potential here.
So you mentioned that in a way Scotland has been a little bit overlooked in terms of its potential. Would you say that in regards to your project, that's primarily because of the issues that EVL had in the past, and also because there's overburden, so that there's no real sort of outcropping or evidence of the mineralization that's obvious?
I think in the case of EVL, I think that was a past issue that's been resolved. Peak managed to negotiate exploration agreements with the landowners, plus follow on up to 100-year mining rights for the area. So I don't see that as an issue anymore. In Cornwall, you've got a lot more outcrop, so you can actually see the mineralization, and that's historically what led exploration and mining initiatives there. Here in Scotland, I describe it as almost like a tablecloth, a drape of this glacial till that was deposited after the last ice age, which really masks the underlying geology. And because of that, there's really been a lack of focus. And now with drilling and new technology, geophysics, remote sensing, that's allowing geology, maybe artificial intelligence, to guide future exploration and make new discoveries.
So you guys have got a Scottish project. We know that in the UK projects are very popular with UK investors, Richard. How easy is it for them to access your Canadian listing? And do you have many UK investors on the register?
We have a few. When we raised the money earlier this year, we had a condition with the agreement with Peak that Peak shareholders could participate in the $2.5 million financing that we completed, and a number of those shareholders did participate. Um, Most sophisticated retail investors would have access to an account which would allow you to buy shares on the TSX or TSX
Mm.
Venture Exchange. So it's not difficult. But going forward, I think if we are successful and we can really demonstrate some good size potential to what we're doing right now, I would see us following a similar track to that which we did at Cornish Metals, which would to have a listing here in the UK and open up investment opportunities to UK investors.
Yeah, you've travelled this journey before in the sense with Cornish Metals.
I have, it's not easy. It can be an expensive process, but I think the success that we had with the initial listing with Cornish Metals, would give me encouragement that we could do it again. And you're always really at the mercy of the market. If the market's supportive of what you're doing and you can raise the money, it'll be a success. Um, when we took Cornish Metals public in AIM 2021, that was our second attempt. The previous attempt, we just couldn't get the traction or the interest for what we were trying to do.
And how do you see the market at the moment, Richard, in terms of nickel and mining equities in general?
I think we've entered into what I think could be a prolonged bull market um, for the next 5, 10 years. Certainly with metals like copper, which are going to really drive the energy transition, the technology world, artificial intelligence, data centers. Similarly with tin, nickel with batteries, steel. Even yesterday, the UK announcement that they're going to nationalize the
Yeah.
steelworks here. You do need nickel to produce your own steel. So I think there's growing demand, but on top of that, there's a real push by governments around the world to have domestic supply. And I think that's where the opportunity is because we can't carry on relying on other countries to supply our minerals needs if we have our own domestic supplies here. And you just have to look at what's happening today in Iran and the impact that's having on, for instance, the shipment of sulfur, which is a byproduct from the oil and gas industry in the Middle East. That sulfur is needed by copper projects in Africa for the acid leach to produce the copper. And without that sulfur to make sulfuric acid, then you're going to see a shortfall in copper supply. And so any of these things are all of a sudden sulfur is becoming a critical mineral. So it's a fascinating situation that we're in currently. And I think it's going to become more competitive. Countries are going to want to be self-reliant. And again, that's really the drive here in the UK.
And how about nickel in particular? Because I mean, I think a lot of people would share your sentiment that we've got a bull market in the making here. But for some time, there's been a lot of talk about how the Indonesians are pushing the nickel price down, and that seems to be like a sort of a fundamental dynamic in the nickel market that needs addressing.
I think the Indonesian government is making some headway towards that. Over the last year, they have announced reductions in the output, the scale of the output, because at the end of the day, for them as well, they want to make a bit more money than they currently are. And we've already seen that with the increase in the nickel price from $14,000 a ton to pushing on $20,000 a ton now. Um, and again, I think, from our perspective, the need for the EU to be as self-reliant as possible on nickel supply will help our case from the perspective of, I don't know, what do you call it, responsible mining, responsible supply. When you look at the way and the impact some of the nickel operations in Indonesia has on the environment, it's very negative, very dramatic. Large scale deforestation. Um, some of the companies there are not operating to the same standards that you would expect in the West, with regards to the impact it has on not just the environment but local communities. And I think that will obviously be seen as a benefit for what we do here in the UK and Europe.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about the nickel price just there. Within living memory, the nickel price has been a lot higher, hasn't it? I mean, I think we had a spike to 50,000 at one point within the last 25 years. So it's not really, it's still plenty of room for it to go up.
Yeah, and this whole sulfur thing as well, that impacts. I think Indonesia imports 75% of the sulfur it needs for the nickel production in Indonesia, so it is reliant very much so on where that material is coming from.
So let's get back to Portsoy just for a second. The work is ongoing. At what point do you think you'll be able to talk to investors about how big you really think it is? I mean, you talked about district scale potential. Are you going to be able to wrap some real numbers around the project anytime soon?
That's a great question. I think we're way too early at this point. As an example, I'll just describe the two targets that we're working on currently. The South Zone has a surface footprint, which is combined magnetic and/or soil geochemical response that shows a target that's about 3 kilometers long. And to date, we've drilled about a 400-meter strike length of that. So you've only tested, say, 15% of the total length of what appears to be the geochem and geophysical anomaly. The North Zone, which is 600 meters away, the footprint of that target is 1 kilometer long, and we've only tested basically 2 holes. So it's wide open to the west. And then nearby those two targets, we've got 3 circular anomalies, which have, one of them had 3 drill holes put into it by Goldfields 50 years ago. They had peridotite host, which is the host we're looking for with disseminated sulfides. They didn't particularly sample much of it because they were looking for massive sulfides, but where they got stringers of massive sulfides, they were getting over 1% copper. Now, in those cases, they only drilled to 200 meters depth, and they didn't reach the base of the intrusion, which is where you'd expect to find the accumulation of massive sulfides. So, as these things are injected, the sulfides are much heavier in the melt and they sink to the bottom. So we know there's disseminated sulfides and there's a big source of sulfur in the area. We know there's nickel with the sulfides, but we've got 3 of these circular anomalies which really have not been tested to look at accumulations of sulfides at the base. So I think it's too early to say when we'll have a resource, but with some good results, hopefully we can keep drilling and show that we are looking at something that's got, hopefully, tens of millions of tons potential.
So what sort of depths are you drilling to at the moment?
Well, the mineralization effectively comes to surface, and the deepest hole we planned on this current round is between 450 and 500 meters depth. It's an inclined hole. Historically, the deepest intercepts are only 180 meters vertical below surface. So we're looking at extending that another 150 meters down dip. If we can demonstrate that the mineralization continues, then that gives us a lot of confidence in the system, in the continuity of the mineralization. And Chris Mackenzie, who's put this project together with Peak, he's worked on similar systems in Botswana way back in the late 80s, early 90s. And when you get into a big system, you can trace these mineralized horizons for, in some cases, kilometers.
Amazing. So at some point, you're going pretty deep, I suppose, for a junior at 500 meters. But do you expect you might drill even deeper at some point down the line?
Yeah, it depends what the electromagnetics show us and what the future airborne surveys demonstrate. Obviously, we'll have to test good-looking targets. Another good example I like to use is a Canadian-listed company called Talon Metals, and they have a project called Tamarack in northern US, and they were testing a target not too dissimilar from what we are looking at here in Scotland. And then about a year ago at PDAC, they were drilling a deeper target around about 750 meters depth, and they intersected one of the world's probably highest grade nickel, copper, cobalt, platinum, gold intercepts ever recorded. So high grade, in fact, that they ended up donating one specimen of the drill core to one of the museums over there. So they were getting 11% nickel, 12% copper, 6 grams gold, 6 grams palladium. So, when you get into these systems, they can be high grade. Another example I like to use is the Sudbury Basin, which for a long time has been, one of the world's greatest nickel suppliers, nickel copper suppliers. And today you've got companies drilling 2.5 kilometers to find similar types of mineralization that we see within 20 meters of surface in Scotland.
I mean, people do sometimes talk about the geological continuity between Scotland and Eastern Canada, don't they?
Yes, you've got, you did have the two continents together at one point, and there was a period of mountain building and deformation. So there is potentially some similarities, but I think that area where Tamarack is not related to what we're doing.
Right, right.
Yeah.
But I mean, talking of North America, let's perhaps touch on the North American projects that you guys have. Tell us a little bit about what's going on there and what your plans are.
So the first project that we picked up in kind of what I call the new Winshear was this Thunder Bay Gold project, which was brought to us by a local prospector. The geology in the area is Archean in age, so the Archean greenstone belts around the world are prolific gold producers. And in the western part of the belt to the west-northwest of Thunder Bay, there are a number of known gold occurrences. Tower Mountain is one, the Delta project is one further west, and then the furthest west is called Moss project, which is controlled by a company called Gold X2. And they recently secured $100 million financing, primarily through AngloGold Ashanti. And they've just recently published a 6 million ounce resource. They've got a big drill program ongoing, and it's really put the focus on the belt as being prospective for large, open pitable gold deposits. Now, the prospector who brought this project to us, he recognized that you've got the same geology on the east side of Thunder Bay. And we ended up staking about 360 square kilometers, covering about a 40-kilometer section from Thunder Bay northeastwards. Remarkably, even though it's so close to the city, there's little to no drilling ever conducted historically there. And so the first pass work we did last year was to cover the project with till sampling program. So again, you've got glacial till covering the area. That generated a number of targets, the two biggest of which one was called Inflection, which is 6 kilometers long, in the central southern part of the property. And in the eastern part of the project area, we have a target called El Dorado. And they both sit in areas which look geologically complex, but it's where a lot of structures either come together or you've got regional folds. The structural setting looks very conducive to a mineralizing system. So we followed that up last year with some soil sampling. We reconfirmed a 6 kilometer long gold in soil anomaly at Inflection. And at El Dorado, we have a 4 kilometer long gold in soil anomaly that's open to the north, it's open to the west. So this year's program, more detailed soil sampling. We think we've got a corridor that's about 20 kilometers long, which has lots of structures, very good geology, basically from Inflection right up to El Dorado that is prospective. And then at the northern part of the project area, we've got a huge regional structure called the Kingfisher Fault. And you've got remnants of volcanic rocks tied up in that. And we've got gold in till anomalies coming off that structure. So we've got a soil sampling program planned for that area this year as well as some airborne magnetic surveys to give us an idea of what the underlying potential structural controls are that's the source for this gold we're seeing on surface.
So lots of data gathering this year. Does that mean you'll likely be drilling it next year?
That's the plan. We'd like to be in a position where we've at least delineated some drill targets this year. If the market conditions are right and we've got some very compelling targets, we might even look at doing something this year, but there is a planning process to go through. So most realistic, it'll be next year.
And what's the appetite for gold exploration like this in Canada at the moment? Is it quite lively given the gold price?
Oh, it's tremendous. You know, it's a fascinating study. I think when we went through the last bull market in resources, which really started around 2002, 2003, up until 2011, 12, there were a lot more investment funds, certainly in Canada, but a lot of the companies felt that it opened up the world for exploration. So a lot of that money went to Africa, it went to more far-flung places to do exploration. I think what you found over the last 5, 6 years is a contraction of that back into Canada, certainly from a gold perspective. And you just have to look at some of the new discoveries that have been made over the last 5, 10 years. I going even back to 2006 to 2011 when Osisko Mining discovered the Malartic gold deposit. That was an old gold mine which had already mined 7 million ounces of gold, and they went in, put the land package together. Next thing you knew, they had 16 million ounces of gold, and they sold it for over $3 billion.
Yeah.
You are seeing a lot more discoveries, certainly in the Archean greenstone belts of Quebec and Ontario. Further west in British Columbia, you've got the Golden Triangle, where people are making companies are making new discoveries. So, I think there's a bit of a misconception that everything's been thoroughly explored. I think it's opening up new areas and new techniques to modern exploration. And I think you're seeing a lot more money now put into new ideas, and you're going to see a lot more discoveries come out of that.
And how about Winshear itself then? So you've got Portsoy, you've got the Canadian assets. So are you looking to add anything else to the portfolio, or have you got enough to be going on with?
I think we've got enough currently. We've got a busy year ahead. Obviously, the drilling, metallurgical work, geophysical work in Scotland, sampling, airborne surveys in Canada, and obviously on the back of that, we need to plan the next steps.
Yeah, so perhaps before we close it out, Richard, reiterate what you think the next steps might be for Portsoy in particular.
Well, Portsoy drill results, metallurgical results, the whatever comes out of the geophysical work. We're potentially looking at flying an airborne survey, as I said, gravity, magnetics. That would hopefully give us other targets within the region to go and explore. So on the back of that, more drilling and expanding the project and hopefully get into a point where we can publish a resource and look at something that is going to be viable.
Yeah, I mean, so you'll be putting out drill results in what looks to be, as we were saying tentatively earlier in the conversation, a growing bull market for mining. So that could be received very well.
I think every time you see a bit of positive news coming out of the US and what they think is going to happen in Iran, you'll see the bull market, everybody starts to invest again. And then the next day you've got, oh, we're back to square one and everybody pulls back again. So I think once we get through this Iran situation, I can see the market picking up quite strongly going forward.
Yeah, and it's a good time to be busy for a company like yours.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Richard, it's been great to talk to you and to catch up on Winshear. Wish you a lot of luck with the ongoing programs, and hopefully we'll be talking again sometime soon.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.